an issue, if water was in short supply, lentils could probably save your life. And even if you couldn't make a soup out of them, you could take those same dried stored lentils and sprout them and have wonderful, nutritious lentil sprouts. They actually taste pretty good. Um, a lot of people would say alfalfa, but alfalfa actually does have some toxicity when eaten raw. Now, I've eaten alfalfa sprouts all my life. Mom was a hippie, but we, I mean, I enjoyed them in salad. I enjoy them on a sandwich. But apparently, there is some concern about eating too much raw alfalfa. Fenugreek and lentils don't fall into that category. Now, of course, being southern, also have to grow my field peas, my Dixie Lee peas, my rattlesnake beans, my purple runners, uh, zipper creams. I love heirloom cowpeas, essentially black-eyed peas at the very minimum, and some butter beans. I've got to have my butter beans. Those are they're heirloom varieties of lima beans, and I love butter beans. And yeah, I'd have some pintos and some black beans because I got to have some refried beans and some, burritos every now and then. Good pot of chili. But yeah, probably some navy beans. I really do like beans. I'm a legume fanatic. I just, growing up in the country, we had beans and peas at every meal. I'm not kidding. I mean, every single supper, every single day of the year, my grandmother had a pot of field peas and a pot uh, of butter beans going on the stove. Other times a year, she might have done fresh, sweet garden peas. There might have been black-eyed peas, well, there were. Quite often we had black-eyed peas. Kidney beans, I mean, but always on the back of her stove was a pot of field peas and a pot of butter beans. Two separate pots, okay? The field peas would be peas with snaps. The butter beans would just be plain butter beans, but she'd add some cornmeal to it. That was really important to thicken the broth. And they were seasoned with fatback. There was never a single meal um, from birth to the point I could eat solid food, right? To the time she had a couple heart attacks and couldn't cook anymore, and that's when she taught me to cook. Um, when she was in her 80s, and I guess I was in my mid 20s. So there was not a single meal where there were those two pots of peas and beans were not on the stove. And so for me, a supper, and there was always a pot of rice. Okay, we're from the eastern north part of North Carolina where rice culture began. Supper was always going to be meat, beans, peas, rice, gravy, usually greens, mustard, turnips, collards, you name it, corn, tomatoes. Those were ubiquitous. I mean, always. Okra. I mean, in season or out, we froze plenty of okra, froze plenty of tomatoes, so we'd have it in the wintertime. Throughout the season, there'd be fresh cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, radishes on the table. We always had what they call crudité now, which we just called, vegetables. And, these huge plates and seconds and thirds. But the field peas and butter beans were the heart and foundation of every meal. I mean, that was just the constant. We didn't know, depending on what she had on hand, we might have chicken, we might have pork chops, we might have, country style steak. It might be game, it might be fish, but the peas and beans were always there. The rice was always there. Usually some potatoes. Always cornbread. Every single meal, cornbread. Oftentimes dinner rolls or biscuits too, if there were biscuits left over from breakfast. And we ate what people think of the huge feast of Thanksgiving. That was the regular supper on the farm. And leftovers would be had the next day for lunch. And the whole thing would start over again. And she would cook for not only, a family of four kids with their kids, but cousins and aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, farm hands. On a given day, she might have been cooking for 37, 47 people. The dining room table would be full with family. The back porch would be farm hands with sitting in a rocking chair with a plate in their lap and a glass of tea sitting beside them. And the front door was open and anybody was welcome to come in. If there were the staples we had were certainly filled peas and butter beans, greens, okra, tomato, rice, potatoes, and pork fat. Every meal, everything was cooked with pork fat. Fatback. Her father raised hogs, and he made phenomenal hams and bacon and sausage. Um, my grandfather kept other livestock. Meat was never in short supply, and vegetables were always in abundance. Always in abundance. We kept 3 chest freezers and 2 upright freezers stocked all the time, plus um, a room full of canned goods, a pantry essentially. She would do tons of canning of vegetables, make jams and jellies and pickles. Uh, Huge. I mean, the size of most people's kitchen. It was just lined wall to wall with shelves full of canned goods and cabinets full of dried goods. I mean, dried beans and rice and everything. A nice big spice cabinet because that's part of my tradition, part of my heritage. We're part French. We and Creole and Cajun and all that. We use a lot of herbs and spices. And my gosh, nobody ever went hungry around there. That I guess the actual home place with the farm around it. There were other properties that my grandfather owned. That 38 acres produced more food per year. It probably produced enough food per year to feed the entire town. I mean, my grandfather was just a genius when it came to farming, and my grandmother was just a genius when it came to cooking and storing food. And that's it's quite a legacy, quite a legacy, and I hope I live up to it. I don't have a family to feed. God's never brought the right lady into my life. But someday I would love to have kids of my own, and I'd love to actually hands-on teach them everything I talk about to y'all. That's that's what I want more than anything else in life. But it may happen, it may not. Not my will, but thine. Exactly. So I'll get you one bonus. One we'll throw in. It's ginger. We've already talked about ginger under turmeric. Ginger is antiviral, and if you go back to my show on antiviral herbs, that's where I discussed it a lot. Ginger is also very good. It's very effective against nausea, especially motion sickness or morning sickness. The fresh juice of ginger, though, is a powerful antiviral. You actually have to take the fresh root, throw it in the blender or the juicer, and press it. That's where it is, and it's most effective for what it can touch. So it's really good for sore throats, like strep throat and such as that. But in any form, it's a good carminative, which means it helps settle an upset stomach. Good for dyspepsia, which is burping and gas and all that. It's a stimulant. It actually increases the body temperature. So a tea made of ginger, or actually just putting ginger in a hot bath, can help break a fever. Good for colic, gastritis, and diarrhea. And I don't know about, I cannot speak for other dogs. My border collie loves spice. This is the weirdest thing. He was about 2 when I found him. Somebody had abandoned him out in timber country. He's been with me now for about 15 years. So he's a very old dog. But when he was just come into the household, and he was still unsure about things, and I didn't know what he liked to eat or not, I had this craving for a hot, spicy pickled sausage. So I just ran down to a gas station and got one of those. I think it was like a Bahama Mama, or one of those nasty, cheap, very bad for you hot pickled sausages. But they're super hot and spicy, right? So I'm sitting there and I took a bite of it and I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. I had a cold beer and it was just very satisfying when you get that taste. And he's looking at me. He's like, I want some of that. And I'm like, you don't want any of this. This is hot and spicy. Trust me, you don't want any of this. And he's, adamant. So I gave him a little bite. His eyes got as big as saucers. He started drooling and he literally jumped on me and tried to take the rest of it away from me. Seriously, this dog, my border collie, loves spice. He loves cayenne pepper. He loves jalapeno and even habanero peppers. If I put I love habanero sauce. I eat it quite a bit on a lot of things. If I put it on my food, he smells it and he wants the habanero sauce. He's crazy, I know. He also loves ginger and cloves and such as that, those hot spices. Cinnamon. The dog goes crazy over cinnamon. When his appetite is low, because, I mean, he's at least 16, maybe 17 years old now. He's a very old dog, mostly blind, mostly deaf. And he's always got a good appetite, but if it's a little off, a ginger snap cookie will do the trick every time. I'll get a couple of ginger snaps. I like them in the morning with coffee occasionally. I'll just dip in my coffee and eat one. And he'll get up out of bed and he'll come over and he'll stare at me. He's like, I want a cookie. So I'll hand him a ginger snap. He'll take it and spit it out and look at it. And then he'll gobble it up. He does that with everything. He always spits it out and looks at it. Like I'm trying to poison him or something. But it will stimulate his appetite. And I can tell you, when he's been sick, when he's been just been really, I mean, I thought he was near the end. I mean, this is a very old dog. A ginger snap cookie brings his appetite back and puts the spark back in his eyes like nothing else. Now, these sunshine ginger snaps, which I usually buy, now I do sometimes bake my own gingerbreads and such as that. They not only have ginger and clove in them, but they also have cayenne pepper. So I don't know if he's necessarily, I think it's the combination. And he just loves it. Give him that, and then, maybe I'll go in and, brown up some beef for lunch or some other meat. And suddenly that dog has an appetite like he did when he was 2 or 3 years old. Every time. It's like that ginger just brings him back to life. And it's kind of strange because, Dr. Patrick Jones, the great herbalist, is also a veterinarian. And he keeps cayenne pepper on hand for dogs that are going into shock. Dogs have been hit by a car, they're about to die, or not recovering well from surgery or for whatever reason. He said, when their eyes are fading, their gums are getting pale, he just shoots a little cayenne pepper tincture into their throat or some hot sauce and then brings them right back. That seems to be what Ginger does for my dog Buddy. It's absolutely amazing. And I got to see it again last night. He was like moping around the house, I mean, he seemed to be having a rough time. And I was just sitting there eating a couple of ginger snaps. And he came over to me. He started staring at me adamantly. And I remembered, I was like, oh my gosh, I should have given him a cookie earlier. He loves them. He's a weird dog, though. He loves onions and garlic. And, every single veterinarian says never feed your dog alliums because it can actually cause anemia. If I don't put onions and or garlic or both in the meat that I'm cooking, he doesn't want to eat it. Literally, the dog was like crazy over meatloaf or, ground beef with onions that I'm going to put in a burrito or something. He has, I don't know, he has a very odd sense of taste. And considering he's at least 16 or 17 years old, apparently it hasn't done him any harm. Neither is the chocolate that he enjoys. And, I don't know. I'm not a veterinarian. I don't give advice. Golly Pete, but everything they say that will harm a dog certainly hasn't harmed him. And he's outlived every single dog in the neighborhood that was around when he came into my life. So who knows? Who knows? I don't know. But I would grow ginger if you could. If you can, I grow it in pots because it is a hot weather plant. It is tropical. It comes from India. Put it in a sandy soil. Give it full sun. It probably will not really sprout and get growing until you hit about 80 degrees. Well, actually, till you hit about 90 degrees. I'd say 85 to 90 in a daily high. So I grow it in a sunny window. I grow it almost in like a mini greenhouse when I'm in the mountains. Same with turmeric and galangal. They're all related. Excellent herbs if you live where it's hot and you have a sandy soil and it's kind of dry, but it can actually handle some rain. I mean, it's kind of tropical, but it doesn't want wet feet, that's for sure. You can probably grow ginger